Christians worldwide watched Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu announce the deal of the century and began to ask themselves, is this it? Is this the peace and safety Paul prophesied in 1 Thessalonians 5? Like the rest of the Christian world, I anxiously clicked on YouTube to watch the Trump announcement because of the potential prophetic implications. But today, we're not going to discuss the deal of the century in detail. Instead, I'd like to discuss the issue of peace and safety in 1 Thessalonians 5 first, because frankly, I think it's more important. You see, I watched my home screen on YouTube fill up with videos, each promising that this peace plan was the peace plan to fulfill 1 Thessalonians 5. And then bingo! Right after that would come the rapture and then sudden destruction upon the earth. I probably saw half a dozen videos with that premise, and there are now maybe hundreds like that on the web. So because this thinking is so prevalent, so pervasive in Christian culture, I thought we should take a minute or two to discuss exactly what Paul was talking about. Was he actually talking about a peace agreement when he talked about peace and safety and penned these words? The day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. If we look at this passage closely, we see peace and safety is linked to the timing of something known as the day of the Lord. And this day will famously come as a thief in the night. Then someone known as they will say peace and safety. After they say this, sudden destruction will come upon these people like labor pains upon a woman in childbirth, and they will not escape. In the minds of what seems like the majority of prophecy teachers on the web, this is speaking of a peace treaty, which is signed with Israel, that launches the 70th week of Daniel, and which brings sudden destruction on the world after the rapture of the church. What is my opinion? Is that what Paul was prophesying? I don't think so. And I don't think Paul was really prophesying at all. He was referencing a prophecy made by others. One prophecy in the Old Testament and one in the New Testament, both involving the day of the Lord. And when you see these other passages, you'll say, oh, I see it now. They are almost the same passage, and yes, they are. Paul was a great teacher. Paul is first referencing a statement from the prophet Isaiah. Let's look at it. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Notice Isaiah mentions the day of the Lord and destruction, the same two terms used by Paul. Isaiah continues, they will wither like a woman in labor. We see the labor pains mentioned as well, 3 out of 3. It's pretty obvious this is part of what Paul was referencing in 1 Thessalonians 5. Then Isaiah gives the timing. They will look at one another in astonishment, their faces aflame. Behold, the day of the Lord, there it is again, is coming, cruel with fury and burning anger, to make the land a desolation. And he will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light, the sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Notice Paul says the sun, moon, and stars go dark. And on that day, it is also a day of fire and brimstone, where the faces of those people are aflame. So what day is that? It's the 6th seal of Revelation. When he broke the 6th seal, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth. So this isn't the beginning of the 70th week at all. In fact, it's more like close to the end. Okay, you say, I'll give you that. But Paul is talking about peace and safety here as well. And I don't see that in Isaiah 13. No, I don't see it either. But I do see it in the teachings of our Lord, Yeshua Jesus. For just like lightning, when it flashes out of one part of the sky, shines to the other part of the sky, so will the Son of Man be in his day. It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be just the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. In this passage, we see the suddenness of lightning. And we also see people who are living normal lives, feeling secure and safe. And then suddenly, destruction comes on them by fire and brimstone. Later on in Luke, Jesus ties in the suddenness and the escape. Be on guard so your hearts will not be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of life, and the day will not come upon you suddenly like a trap, praying that you may have the strength to escape. Interestingly, the word for suddenness found in this Luke passage is found in only one other place in the New Testament. Guess where that is? 1 Thessalonians 5:3, where Paul speaks of sudden destruction. And if we look at the version of Yeshua Jesus' teaching in Matthew, we see this exact same timing. For just as lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky. The sudden event of Jesus' return will happen after the sixth seal, the darkening of the sun, moon, and stars, just as we saw in Isaiah, just as we saw in Luke. So when Paul says peace and safety, he is not speaking of a peace treaty that makes everyone on earth say peace and safety prior to the 70th week. He is talking about an overall sense of life as normal, planting, building, marrying, an overall sense that life is okay immediately prior to the return of Jesus and the pouring out of fire and brimstone. Not a pre-70th week of Daniel event at all. As we said, more toward the end of it. Maybe you need more proof. So let's keep reading Paul's teaching in 1 Thessalonians 5. But you, brethren, are not in the darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness. So let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, and those who get drunk at night. We just saw Paul contrast believers with unbelievers, claiming unbelievers will have the day of the Lord overtake them as a thief, but believers will be alert. Now, look what Yeshua Jesus' teaching about the day of the Lord in Matthew 24 has to say. If the head of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, there's the thief, he would have been on the alert. Again, it uses these same exact words, thief and alert. Paul also speaks of unbelievers as being drunk. Look what Yeshua Jesus says about that topic in his teaching about the day of the Lord. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards. Once again, Paul and our Lord use the exact same terms. Could it be that Paul is referencing Jesus? I say it is. So what day is that? Our Lord tells us, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. It is that day, a day he was speaking of previously in Matthew 24, the most significant day he mentioned previously. And when was that? After the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. So the day Paul is talking about, when they, the unbelievers, say peace and safety, is this same day. We have seen it repeatedly across Revelation, across Matthew, across Luke, across Isaiah. It is the day of the Lord, after the sixth seal is opened. Now, I am sure nearly every other video that you're watching on this subject has indicated that a signed peace agreement will be the peace and safety Paul claims. But it isn't even biblically possible, as we have just seen. To which you're probably thinking right now, well, he seems to be making sense here, except how can anyone say peace and safety after the Great Tribulation? Just look at this picture on the screen that you're putting up, Nelson. How could anyone say peace and safety at a time like that? The answer is, the picture we looked at is probably what the world will look like after the wrath of God begins, and the trumpets are blown, and there's fire and brimstone. But during the Great Tribulation, this is what the world will look like for the vast majority who decide to worship the Antichrist and take his mark. It will be one big party for them. The people it won't be like a party for are Christians and Jews who are hunted down and killed by the Antichrist forces. Everyone else is going to feel that that is a time of peace and safety. Sure, the beginning of the tribulation period is going to be difficult with war, famine, and disease. But after the Antichrist takes power, things are going to really settle down for unbelievers. And they're going to say, hey, look at all we have under the mark of the beast. We can eat, we have peace, we have safety, and we're getting rid of those annoying Christians. So this is the peace and safety that Paul was talking about, and Jesus was talking about when he said people would be marrying, giving in marrying, eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting, building, life back to normal. But then sudden destruction comes upon them in the form of fire and brimstone, and they will not escape. So our Christian culture today, in my opinion, has grossly overestimated the prophetic importance of peace plans like the deal of the century. And maybe the reason for that is we don't have our rapture timing correct. And now, I have a special treat for you. A special proof just for those who are watching the entire video. A proof I'm rather sure you have never seen before. Let's see how Paul concludes this teaching in 1 Thessalonians 5. I think you're going to be shocked. For God did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we wake or sleep, we should live together with him. Therefore, comfort each other. First, Paul tells us we aren't destined for wrath. Where do we see that wrath beginning? For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Revelation 6:17. It's in Revelation 6, right after the sixth seal. Totally consistent with everything else we've seen in this video. And now for the big surprise. Paul also tells us whether we are asleep or awake, we will live together with him. And therefore we are to comfort one another. I bet those words are familiar to you. Where have you seen those words before? Only one chapter earlier. Those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. Paul uses the same words again. Asleep, together, and comfort. Where is this second passage from? I'm sure most of you know. It's the famous rapture passage of 1 Thessalonians 4. Paul is summarizing it back in chapter 5 to show that both chapters 4 and 5 are about the same things. And by doing so, he is giving us the timing of the rapture passage. He is showing us that all these things happen on the day of the Lord after the sixth seal, not prior to the 70th week, not at the end of the 70th week, after the sixth seal. None of what goes on in chapter 5 is prior to the 70th week. Wow. I am sure that took you by surprise. Now in our next video, we're going to look at something even more amazing, more shocking, and more surprising, if that's possible. We are going to look at the treasures of Solomon's temple, 170 tons of gold and silver, plus the ephod of the high priest, the golden altar of incense, and possibly even the Ark of the Covenant itself. A 2,600-year-old copper treasure map has been discovered, and we now know where these treasures are, and interestingly, so does Israel. To keep watching, click right here. If the video hasn't been published yet, take a minute to subscribe and ring the bell icon. Then you will be notified the minute that video comes out. This is Nelson, and I'll see you there.